My best friend had been sleeping with my husband for 18 months. I found out when my 5-year-old overheard them talking in the kitchen at her own birthday party. I didn't scream. I smiled, cut the cake, and handed Diane a slice. Then I leaned close and whispered something that made the color drain out of her face so fast she looked like a photograph left in the sun too long. She collapsed forward, straight into the buttercream roses my daughter had spent 20 minutes picking out at the bakery. Some people still think I went too far. After everything you are about to hear, I genuinely want to know if you agree. My name is Nora Scott. I was 34 years old on the afternoon of April 12, 2024, standing in my own kitchen in a floral sundress I had ironed that morning because my daughter, Lily, had asked me to look pretty for her party. Lily was turning 5. There were 18 kids in the backyard, a rented bounce castle, and a cake shaped like a mermaid that had cost more than my first car payment. My husband, Daniel, was manning the grill. My best friend of 11 years, Diane Aucaffer, was supposed to be helping me arrange juice boxes on the patio table. She was not arranging juice boxes. To understand how I could stand there smiling, you need to understand how we got here. Because this did not begin on April 12th. This began much earlier. In the quiet accumulation of things I chose not to say out loud while I was building something they had no idea existed. Daniel and I had been married for 7 years. We met when I was 26 and he was 31 at a fundraiser for a children's hospital where I had been volunteering every third Saturday for 2 years. He was charming in the specific way that men who have never really struggled tend to be, easy with compliments, quick with a laugh, comfortable in rooms full of people. His family had money, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that shows up in small, quiet ways. The kitchen in his parents' house had marble countertops that were never dirty. His mother, Renata Osaibansu, wore simple gold jewelry that cost more than most people's cars. His father, Douglas, had retired at 61 to a golf course in Scottsdale without any visible financial stress. They were not cruel people. I want to be clear about that. But they had a particular way of looking at me, at Nora Scott, daughter of a public school librarian and a retired plumber from Dayton, Ohio, that communicated without a single direct word that they were waiting to see if I would turn out to be enough. Not enough for them, exactly. Enough for their son. Diane was different. Or so I believed. We had met in graduate school, both of us getting our MBAs at the same time, studying in the same library carrels, surviving the same brutal first-year finance sequence on 4 hours of sleep and terrible dining hall coffee. She was brilliant and funny, and she had a laugh that started somewhere deep in her chest. I trusted her the way you trust someone who has seen you ugly cry over a case study at 2 in the morning and showed up the next day with breakfast sandwiches anyway. She met Daniel through me, at our engagement party as a matter of fact. I did not know, when I introduced them, what I was setting in motion. I am not sure knowing would have changed anything. I was 27 and I was in love, and I believed that the people closest to me were exactly who they appeared to be. That belief is a kind of luxury I no longer have, but I do not spend much time mourning it. The first time the Osaibansu family made me feel small, Lily was not yet born. Daniel and I had been married for 8 months. We were at Sunday dinner at Renata and Douglas's house, a regular ritual that happened every other week in their formal dining room with the linen napkins that had to be folded a specific way. Renata had asked me, over the soup course, whether I was still doing the consulting work or whether I had found something more stable. I was, at that point, 18 months into building a boutique management consulting practice that was generating enough revenue that I had hired 2 contractors and moved out of my home office into a proper space on the 3rd floor of a building downtown. I had 3 retainer clients. I was doing exactly what I had spent 6 years of education and 4 years of corporate grinding preparing myself to do. Still consulting, I said, and kept my voice pleasant. Renata stirred her soup. I only ask because Daniel mentioned you had a slow quarter. Daniel had not mentioned this to me. I had not had a slow quarter. I had invoiced $214,000 in the preceding 3 months, which was the best quarter I had ever had. I looked across the table at my husband, who was suddenly very interested in his bread roll. I did not correct Renata. I set my spoon down slowly and said that things were picking up nicely, thank you. What I did that night, when we got home, was open my laptop and respond to a partnership inquiry I had been sitting on for 2 weeks. I had been hesitating because it felt fast. After dinner with Renata, it did not feel fast anymore. I signed the letter of intent before midnight. That was the first micro-victory. Small, invisible, completely mine. The second incident was at Lily's second birthday. Lily was not yet speaking in full sentences, which meant the party was really for the adults. Diane was there, and Daniel's college friend group, and Renata and Douglas, and Daniel's younger sister, Imani, who was 24 and had recently decided she wanted to get into real estate. Imani had pulled me aside near the gift table to ask if I had any contacts at commercial brokerages, because she was thinking about going commercial instead of residential. I had, at that point, recently closed on an investment property, a 4-unit residential building in a neighborhood that was quietly appreciating. I had purchased it for $380,000, using a combination of retained earnings from the practice and a commercial loan I had structured with my financial advisor, Quaim Assant, who had been helping me manage the business's growth since year 2. I had not mentioned the property to Daniel's family. I had barely mentioned it to Daniel, who had signed the loan documents and then appeared to forget about it almost immediately, the way he forgot about most things that did not directly involve him. I told Imani I did not know many commercial brokers personally, but I would keep her in mind. She thanked me and wandered back to the party. I did not correct her assumption that I was a person who would need to ask around for that kind of connection. I was already thinking about the second property. The third incident was smaller but sharper. About 6 months before that April birthday party, so around October of 2023, Renata and I had a brief conversation at another family dinner where she mentioned, almost in passing, that she had heard Diane had gotten a significant promotion at her firm. Diane worked in corporate finance at a mid-size investment group. She was good at her job. The promotion was real. "It is so good," Renata said, looking at me with something warm but positioned carefully just above pity, "to see women in your cohort really succeeding. In your cohort. As though I were an observer of a cohort rather than a participant in one. As though my own business, which by October of 2023 had grown to a firm with 6 full-time employees and a client roster that included 2 regional hospital systems, did not count as succeeding because nobody had given me a title on a LinkedIn page. I thanked her and told her Diane absolutely deserved it. And then I went home and called my attorney, Beatrice Lamb, the following morning. Not because of Renata. Because I had been sitting on a conversation with Beatrice for 3 weeks, and the dinner had reminded me, again, that no one was coming to validate my timeline except me. Beatrice and I had our first substantive meeting on October 22nd, 2023. What we discussed that morning is a detail I am going to hold for a moment, but I will tell you this. By the time I left her office, I had begun something that could not be undone. That was the third micro-victory, and it was the biggest one, even though it looked, from the outside, like nothing at all. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, you know exactly what that particular silence feels like. The one where you smile and nod and carry the knowledge of your own life like a secret folded up small in your coat pocket. It is not comfortable, but it is useful. Daniel and I did not have a bad marriage exactly. We had a marriage that had hollowed out from the inside in the way that some marriages do, not through fighting, but through the gradual accumulation of small absences. He worked in corporate finance, which meant he traveled frequently. He was good with Lily in the way that men who are not naturally patient teach themselves to be good with small children, with effort, and with a kind of relief when the effort was no longer required for the day. He was present at dinner and absent everywhere else. I had stopped asking where he was going on the evenings. He stayed late because the answers had started to feel rehearsed. I am not someone who ignores her instincts. I noticed the rehearsed quality. I filed it. I kept building. The year leading up to Lily's birthday was the most productive year of my professional life. And also, privately, the year I began to understand that my marriage was a structure that someone had been quietly removing the load-bearing walls from while I was looking the other way. In February of 2024, I made an appointment with Quaim to review the investment property, which had appreciated significantly. The appraised value had come back at $540,000 against the $380,000 I had paid. We also reviewed the college fund I had opened for Lily when she was 14 months old, a 529 account that I contributed to monthly without fail. By February of 2024, that account had a balance of $65,000. Quaim had structured the contributions to grow consistently. It had never missed a month. You are in a strong position, Quaim told me, in the measured way that he always spoke, straightening the papers on his desk. Particularly for someone whose personal assets are documented separately from household income. I had been careful about that. Very careful, and deliberately so, for reasons that had started as instinct, and then, after October of 2023, had become something with a legal architecture behind them. In March of 2024, I had my second meeting with Beatrice Lamb. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown with a view of the river that she never seemed to notice. She had been doing family law for 22 years, and she had the specific quality of stillness that people develop when they have heard every version of every story and have stopped being surprised by any of them. She reviewed the documents I brought, made several notes on a yellow legal pad, and looked up at me when she was finished. "You want to move forward with the original timeline," she said. It was not entirely a question. "I want to be ready," I told her. "I am not ready yet, but I am close." She nodded and wrote something else. "There is a financial disclosure request that formally went out in November. The response window closes at the end of April. If Daniel does not respond completely and accurately before then, that becomes its own evidence." I already knew this. I had been the one to instruct her to send it, but hearing her say it in her careful, even voice made it feel more solid. I left Beatrice's office on March 14th, 2024, 4 weeks before Lily's birthday, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the March cold and breathed. There were things in motion that could not be stopped. There were things I did not yet know. And there were things I suspected, but had not yet proven, which is a different category entirely. The category of things that live in the body before they make it to the brain. I had been in that category for most of the preceding year, and I was getting very tired of it. The close calls started in earnest around the time I retained Beatrice, which is probably not a coincidence. Once you are in the process of preparing, your attention sharpens in ways that create friction. You notice things you might have let slide before, and the people around you, the ones who have something to hide, begin to notice that you are noticing. The first close call was in January of 2024, at a Saturday lunch at Renata and Douglas's house. Deanne had been invited, as she often was. She had been folded into the family social calendar gradually over the years, in the way that best friends of spouses sometimes are. I had not thought much about it. I thought about it considerably more afterward. Deanne arrived before me that day because I had stopped for gas and then found myself stuck behind a slow truck on the highway. When I walked into the kitchen, she and Daniel were standing at opposite ends of the kitchen island. Nothing visibly wrong, nothing visibly right either. Diane was holding a glass of sparkling water. Daniel was cutting something. They both looked at me when I came in, and there was a half-second, a very small half-second, where their faces did something before they settled into normal. I would not have caught it 6 months earlier. I caught it then. "Traffic," Daniel said. "Little?" I set my bag on the counter and kissed Lily on the top of her head where she was sitting on the floor assembling a puzzle with Douglas. "Anything I can help with?" "We've got it," Diane said, and her voice was perfectly smooth. She had always been good at smooth. Later, when Renata had us all gathered around the dining table and was ladling out a chicken stew that smelled genuinely wonderful, she looked at me with that particular warmth she occasionally produced and said, "You seem tired, Nora. Are you sleeping all right? Building a business is so demanding. Have you thought about bringing on a partner, someone to share the load?" There was a specific texture to that question. Not the first part, the tired part, which was probably true. The second part, someone to share the load. I looked at Renata. I looked at Douglas, who was nodding mildly over his stew. I looked at Daniel, who was cutting his bread. I looked at Diane, who was looking at her bowl. "I've actually been thinking about bringing on another senior consultant," I said, pleasantly. "The workload has grown faster than I anticipated." Renata smiled. "Delegation is a real skill," I smiled back. Under the table, I had my phone in my hand, and I had already sent a one-word text to Quaim, "Tuesday," which meant, "Can we meet Tuesday?" Which meant, "I have something I want to document." Quaim's reply came back before dessert. "Works for me." The second close call was in early April, about 10 days before Lily's birthday. Diane and I had our regular Wednesday evening, which was something we had done since graduate school, takeout, wine when we felt like it, sometimes a walk if the weather cooperated. These evenings had continued through my marriage and through Lily's birth and through everything, because I had believed, genuinely and completely, that Diane was a fixed point, the person who would not move. We were sitting in my living room with Thai food when she mentioned, casually, that she had run into Daniel at a restaurant in the River North neighborhood 2 weeks earlier. I had not known Daniel was in River North 2 weeks earlier. He had told me he was at a client dinner in the Loop. "Oh, which place?" I asked. My voice was perfectly even. I had picked up my spring roll. Diane picked up her glass of wine. "That Italian place on Superior. Can't remember the name. He was with some work people." A beat, or he mentioned work. I didn't stop to chat, just waved. She took a sip. I bit into the spring roll and said I thought I knew which place she meant. I asked about her week. She told me about a deal her team was closing. We talked for another 90 minutes and she left at 9:15, and I sat on my couch for a long time after the door closed, very still, doing the arithmetic. She had not been waving at him from across a restaurant. I did not know exactly what she had been doing, but I knew that the version she had just told me was constructed. The specific detail, the Italian place on Superior, can't remember the name, from a woman with a nearly photographic memory for restaurants she had been to, was a detail included to provide a shape for the story without providing substance. She had offered it because she thought she needed to, because someone had seen them. And she had decided, between that moment and this one, that the best strategy was a controlled, vague acknowledgement before I heard it from someone else. I thanked her for a nice evening and told her I'd see her at Lily's party on Saturday. She hugged me at the door and told me she could not wait. When I came back inside, I picked up my phone and called Beatrice Lamb. It was 9:22 on a Wednesday evening, and she answered on the third ring, which told me something about the kind of lawyer she was. "I need to move the timeline up," I said. A pause, the sound of something being set down, maybe a mug. "How much?" she asked. "I need everything consolidated before April 12th. Another pause, longer. "That's 10 days, Nora. I know. The financial disclosure response window doesn't close until the end of April. If we move before that, I know what we lose. I need it done anyway." The pause this time was different. Not hesitation. Calculation. "All right," Beatrice said. "Come in Thursday morning, 8 o'clock. Bring the property documentation and the account statements Quame has been compiling." "I'll be there." I sat back down on the couch after I hung up. Lily was asleep upstairs. The Thai food containers were on the coffee table. Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling. 10 days. Everything I had been building quietly for over a year was about to be tested in front of every person in my life who had ever underestimated me, at a mermaid birthday party with a bounce castle in my backyard. The timing could not have been worse. Or maybe, I thought this very clearly, sitting alone in my quiet living room, maybe it was exactly right. Lily's birthday party started at noon on a Saturday that came in warm and bright, the kind of April day that feels like a reward after a long winter. I had been up since 5:45. The bounce castle people arrived at 8 and took 45 minutes longer than they promised, which meant Daniel was still rearranging the backyard furniture at 11:15 when the first parents started pulling up to the curb with their children in party clothes. I had 17 things running at once, and I was managing all of them without raising my voice or losing my smile, which is something I have always been able to do under pressure. The caterer was in the kitchen. The mermaid cake was in its box on the counter, undisturbed. Lily was upstairs with my mother, Connie, who had driven up from Dayton the night before specifically to help. My mother is not a complicated woman. She loves Lily with her whole body, she makes very good potato salad, and she does not ask questions she does not want the answers to. She had come because her granddaughter was turning 5, and she had brought a wrapped gift the size of a small suitcase and an overnight bag. That was the whole of her agenda. Renata and Douglas arrived at 12:15, which was precisely when they said they would, because Douglas believed that punctuality was a form of respect, and Renata believed whatever Douglas believed. They came through the side gate, and Douglas immediately picked Lily up and swung her around, which made her shriek with a pleasure so pure it ached a little to listen to. Renata kissed my cheek and handed me a wrapped package and said the backyard looked beautiful. "Diane helped me with the streamers," I said, because it was true and because I wanted to watch how Renata received Diane's name. Renata smiled warmly. "Where is she? I have not seen her in ages." "She just got here," I said. "She's getting drinks." Imani came through the gate behind her parents, alone, wearing sunglasses she did not take off for the first hour. Daniel's younger sister had recently ended a relationship and was processing it the way she processed most things, by being slightly louder than necessary and redirecting all conversation toward herself. I did not hold it against her. She hugged me and told me the streamers were adorable, and I thanked her and pointed her toward the food table. Diane had arrived at 11:50, which was 30 minutes before any other guest, because she had offered to help set up. I had said yes. I had said yes because saying no to Diane's offer to help at my daughter's birthday party would have required an explanation I was not yet ready to give. So she was there in my backyard in a yellow dress, arranging juice boxes the way I had asked her to, and every time she handed a child a cup of apple juice and smiled her real, warm, chest-deep smile, I felt the specific grief of understanding that something you loved was already gone. The love was real. The betrayal was also real. Both things existed at the same time, and I had learned, in the preceding months, to carry both without letting either one show on my face. Daniel was at the grill. He was doing the thing he did at social gatherings, performing ease, turning his charm all the way up, making the other dads laugh. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. He caught my eye across the yard once and smiled, the easy, automatic smile of a man who believes he is managing everything successfully. I smiled back. Neither of us meant it. The first hour passed the way birthday parties pass when you are running them, in fragments, in motion, in the awareness of what still needs to be done and what can be let go. Lily ran through it all like a small, joyful force of nature, her party dress already grass-stained at the hem by 12:45, her crown tilted to one side, absolutely certain that the universe had arranged this entire afternoon for her specific pleasure. She was not wrong. At 1:15, the bounce castle hit full capacity, and 3 children were crying about different things simultaneously, and the caterer came to tell me we were almost out of lemonade, and I said to add more water and a lemon and call it a second batch, and she looked at me like I had said something wise. My mother materialized at my elbow with a plate of food and pressed it into my hands without a word. I ate standing up, which is the only way I have eaten at any party I have ever hosted. At 1:45, I went inside to get the candles for the cake. I came through the back door and into the kitchen, and I heard them before I saw them. Diane's voice, low and rapid. She doesn't know anything. She would have said something by now. Daniel's voice, lower. You don't know that. Daniel, a pause. I know her. She would not be standing out there smiling if she knew. I stood in the doorway for one full second. The kitchen smelled like frosting and clean dishes. Through the back window, I could see the yard, the streamers, the children, my daughter running with her arms out like she was about to fly. I walked in. They separated, not dramatically, not the theatrical jump of the guilty, just a slight shift in body language, the realignment of 2 people who had been leaning toward each other and pulled back. Daniel turned to the counter. Diane turned to me and smiled, and the smile arrived exactly 2 seconds after it should have, the way a delayed echo arrives after sound. Candles, I said, opening the drawer where I kept them. Big day. Let me help. Diane reached for the cake box. I've got it. My voice was level. My hands were steady. I pulled out the candles, 5 of them, white with gold tips, the ones Lily had picked herself at the store, and I looked at them for a moment, and then I looked up at Diane. She was looking at me with the precise expression of someone who is uncertain whether they have been caught. She had been caught. She just did not know that yet. Can you send Lily in? I said. It's time for cake. She went. Daniel started to say something, and I turned and walked back outside with the candles and the lighter and the cake box, and I set everything on the picnic table, and I called for everyone to gather around. Lily came running. The children gathered. The parents gathered. Renata and Douglas moved closer. Imani appeared from somewhere with her phone out to take a video. My mother stood at my left elbow. The candles went in. The lighter clicked. We sang. All 18 children and 11 adults in the bright April afternoon sang happy birthday to my daughter, who stood with her eyes shining and her crown tilted and her whole face opened up with the specific, unrepeatable joy of being 5 years old and the center of the known universe. I watched her face the entire time. Not Daniel. Not Diane. Lily. When she blew out the candles, 3 tries, the last one getting all 5, everyone cheered. I kissed the top of her head. I told her to make a wish. She pressed her eyes closed for a long, serious moment and then opened them and looked at me. I already did, she said. Good. I began to cut the cake. Go play while I cut. You'll be first. She ran off to the bounce castle and I began slicing, and the line of parents and children formed, and I handed out plates, and somewhere around the 8th or 9th slice, Lily came running back in from the direction of the house. She had gone inside. She had wanted her water bottle, which she had left in the kitchen. She was 5. She went where she needed to go. She came to me at the cake table and tugged my hand, and her face had the particular configuration that children's faces get when they have heard something they do not have context for and are frightened by it. Mommy. Her voice was quiet in a way that was not her normal quiet. I crouched down to her level. What is it, baby? Daddy and Diane were talking inside. She looked toward the house, then back at me. Daddy said something about a doctor, a test, something you weren't supposed to see. She scrunched her nose. I didn't understand it. The yard was loud. The bounce castle was noisy. Nobody around us was listening. I smoothed her hair back from her face very gently. Did it scare you? She considered this with the honesty that 5-year-olds have before they learn to manage other people's feelings. A little. You did the right thing telling me. I kept my voice easy, the way you keep your voice easy when a child is watching your face for cues about whether to panic. Go find Grandma Connie. She has the goodie bags. Help her hand them out. Lily's face reorganized itself around this new task. Okay. She ran toward my mother. I straightened up. I turned back to the cake. I cut 2 more slices with a steady hand. A test. Something you weren't supposed to see. I had not taken any medical tests recently. I was not waiting on any results. Daniel was not, as far as I had been told, managing any health matter that required results to be kept from me. But Diane was. I knew this because Diane had called me 6 weeks earlier, a little rattled, to tell me she had gone in for what she thought was a routine checkup, and the doctor had ordered some additional blood work, and she was waiting on results, and she was trying not to catastrophize. I had told her not to catastrophize. I had told her she was probably fine. I had told her I was there if she needed to talk. And then she had called me 4 days later and said everything was fine, results were normal, she had overreacted. I had believed her without question because I trusted her without question. A test, something you weren't supposed to see. I picked up a slice of cake. I put it on a plate. I walked over to Diane, who was standing near the edge of the gathering talking to a Manny, and I smiled and held out the plate. Here. I kept my voice warm. You have to try the cream filling. Lily specifically requested it. Diane took the plate and smiled back. The smile was real, the kind she could not help. She loved Lily. That part, at least, I believed was genuine. I leaned in, the way you lean in to say something private at a party, and I said, quietly, close to her ear, the test results you asked me to hide were actually positive. The real ones, not the version Daniel told you about. I watched her absorb this. I watched the exact moment her brain went from parsing the sentence to understanding it. She collapsed into the cake. Not a faint, not a graceful slide. Her knees gave in a specific way that sent her forward into the picnic table, and the half-eaten mermaid cake took the impact along with most of Diane's weight, and the cream filling and the blue fondant waves and the sugar mermaid tail all went sideways at once, and the plate she was holding clattered to the ground, and the entire left side of the gathering went quiet with the particular silence of people who have witnessed something and are deciding how to react. Imani grabbed her arm. Someone said something. Daniel was across the yard and his head came up. I had already called Beatrice Lamb, not in that moment, not standing over the cake. I had called her at 9:22 the Wednesday before and I had said, move up the timeline. Everything needed to be in place before April 12th. On April 10th, 2 days before the party, I had gone to Beatrice's office at 8 in the morning and I had signed the last of the documents she had prepared. The divorce filing was complete. The asset disclosures were filed. The property documentation was in order. The college fund account had been formally designated in a structure that Quaim had architected carefully, with appropriate provisions for its continued management. Everything that was mine was documented as mine, legally and irreversibly, before Lily blew out a single candle. What I whispered to Diane at the cake table was not, strictly speaking, a statement of medical fact. Diane had never asked me to hide anything. There were no test results, positive or negative. What I had whispered was the shape of a sentence designed to make a guilty person reveal the weight they were carrying. And Diane had been carrying something. The collapse told me exactly how much. But that moment, the whisper, the cake, the collapse, that was not the confrontation. That was just the opening. The real confrontation began 40 minutes later, after the children had been gathered by their parents, and the birthday gifts had been moved inside, and Lily had been taken upstairs by my mother, who had looked at me once with the kind of look that mothers who raised competent daughters give when they understand that something is happening and they are going to stay out of it. My mother has that quality. I love her for it. The backyard was quiet. The remains of the bounce castle were in a pile near the fence waiting for the rental company. The streamer-strung tables had plates and cups on them, and nobody was cleaning up yet. Renata and Douglas were still there, because Renata had a quality of never being the first to leave any gathering where information might still become available. Imani was there. The caterer's staff was clearing quietly inside. Diane was sitting at the far picnic table with a damp towel pressed to her forearm where she had scraped it on the table edge. Daniel was standing near the back door. I came out from inside with a folder under my arm and I set it on the table where I had cut the cake, and I looked at Daniel. "I need you to stay," I said. "There are things that need to be said in front of your family, and I would rather do it here than in a courtroom." He looked at the folder. He looked at his parents. He looked at Diane and then away from Diane very quickly, which was a mistake because Renata noticed. I saw her notice. Her eyes went from Daniel to Diane and back to Daniel, and she pressed her lips together briefly, the way she did when she was computing something. "Nora." Daniel's voice had the careful, measured quality of a man who is trying to assess how much damage is already done. "This is not the time. I filed for divorce on April 10th. I kept my voice conversational. There were 4 adults watching me, and I was the calmest person in the yard. "Beatrice Lamb has been my attorney since October of 2023. The petition has been filed. You'll receive formal notification this week if you haven't already, but I wanted you to hear it from me first." Renata made a sound, not a word, a sound. She set her glass down on the table, a careful placement that was the exact opposite of careless. Douglas put his hand on his wife's arm. Imani, who had been perched on the edge of the far bench, put both feet flat on the ground. Daniel opened his mouth, then he closed it, then he opened it again. "I don't know what you think. 18 months. My voice was still even. Approximately, if the timeline in the financial disclosure documents is accurate, and I believe it is. The financial disclosure request that Beatrice had formally sent in November had been responded to in February, but not accurately. What Daniel had submitted was a version of our financial picture that significantly minimized his personal asset base and entirely omitted 2 accounts that Quaim had identified through his own due diligence, accounts that were not joint, not disclosed, and not small. The February response had been incomplete by roughly $230,000. I did not say that number yet. I had learned, in the months of preparation, that information has more impact when it arrives in sequence. "The financial disclosure response you submitted in February," I said, "was incomplete." A pause, 4 seconds, nobody spoke. Daniel's hands moved, he put them in his pockets and then took them out again. "Nora, whatever you think you have found, I'm not asking you to admit anything." I opened the folder and placed the first document on the table. It was a summary Quaim had prepared, clean, professional, 2 pages, outlining the discrepancy. "This is what you disclosed. This is what we found. The difference is documented." Renata leaned forward slightly to look at the document without getting up. I watched the line of her jaw tighten. "Those accounts are," Daniel started, "individually held, yes, which is why they needed to be disclosed and weren't." I was not raising my voice, I did not need to. "Beatrice has the full documentation. This is the summary." Imani spoke, her voice was flat. "Daniel, is this real?" He looked at his sister. He looked at the document. He looked at me. "It's more complicated than $230,000. I said the number at normal conversational volume. "That's the discrepancy, not a rounding error." Renata's hand went to the base of her throat. Not dramatically, the way someone reaches for something solid when the ground shifts. She looked at her son with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, something closer to the moment before anger, when the mind is still catching up to what the heart already knows. Douglas had not moved. He was very still in the way that men who have spent decades managing money go still when they hear a number that does not add up. He was listening. From the far table, Diane had not moved. The damp towel was still in her hands. She was watching the folder. "There's something else," I said. I placed the second document on the table. Daniel's chin came up. "Nora, this is a summary of communication logs." I kept my hand flat on the document. "Prepared and reviewed by my attorney. Specific dates, specific patterns. I am not going to go through them out loud. But they document the timeline I mentioned." Imani made a sound under her breath. Renata looked at Diane. What happened to Diane's face in that moment was not something I had expected to feel anything about. I had expected to feel satisfied. I did not feel satisfied. I felt the particular sorrow of watching someone you loved do the arithmetic of the thing they had done, in public, with no escape route available. Her shoulders dropped. Not dramatically. Like something being set down after a long carry. Diane, Renata's voice was quiet, not warm. The warmth was entirely gone. Diane did not look up right away. When she did, her eyes were dry, but her face had a stripped quality, the way a room looks when all the furniture has been moved out. Renata, not yet. Renata turned to her son. Daniel, I want to hear from you. Mom, he stopped. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, looked at it without seeing it, put it back. There wasn't a plan, it just happened. Over 18 months, I said, not unkindly. His mother looked at him for a long time. Douglas, beside her, had not changed his expression. He was the kind of man who would have the real conversation later in private, and everyone in that yard understood that. The house, Renata said, and she was talking to me now, not to her son. You are asking for the house. I am asking for what is documented as mine, I said. The consulting practice has always been my separate property. The investment property was purchased with my business earnings before any joint filing. The college fund is formally designated. The matrimonial home, we can work that out through the attorneys. I am not trying to take anything that isn't mine. A pause. That is more than fair, Douglas said. It was the first thing he had said since I had come outside with the folder, and it landed with the particular weight of a man who chose his words carefully and meant them completely. Daniel looked at his father. Something in his face cracked just slightly around the eyes. Dad, you'll call an attorney this week, Douglas said. That's all I'm saying right now. Imani stood up from the bench. She walked over to where I was standing and she stopped in front of me and she looked at me for a moment. Her sunglasses were finally off. Her eyes were red at the corners. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know. I know you didn't? I meant it. She nodded once and walked to the back door and went inside. I heard her in the kitchen, talking to my mother in a low voice. I heard my mother's response, equally low, and then the sound of the kettle being filled. I turned to Diane. She was still at the far table. She had put the towel down. She was sitting with her hands flat on the table in front of her, looking at nothing in particular. I walked over and I sat down across from her, not standing over her, across from her. At eye level, the way you sit with someone you have known for 11 years. She looked at me when I sat down. I don't have a version of this, she said. That makes me not the worst person in this story. No, I kept my voice level. You don't. Her hand moved toward her glass and stopped. Did Lily actually hear something, or was that, she heard enough? That was all I was going to say about Lily. My daughter was upstairs with her grandmother and her goodie bag and the large mysterious present that had come from Dayton, and she was fine. She would continue to be fine because I had spent the last 6 months making certain of it. Diane's shoulders drew in slowly, the way someone braces. How long have you known? Long enough to be ready. The whisper. Her voice dropped. There are no test results. There are no test results, I confirmed. She let out a breath that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. She touched the bridge of her nose briefly. That was effective. A long silence. I do not expect you to forgive me, she said. I'm not here to forgive or not forgive. I'm here because my daughter's birthday party was happening in my backyard, and I was not going to let it end with unanswered questions. I stood up. The attorneys will handle the rest. I went back inside. What came next was not dramatic. The drama had been in the cake and the folder and the 4 seconds of silence in the yard. What came after that was administrative, and I had spent the better part of a year making sure I understood the difference. Renata found me in the kitchen 20 minutes later. She stood in the doorway in her good blouse with her hands folded in front of her, and she looked at me with an expression that had lost all of its careful positioning. It was just her face. I owe you an apology, she said. Not for today, for longer than today. I looked at her. The consulting work was always real, Renata. She closed her eyes briefly. I know that now. A pause. I think I knew it before. I did not tell her it was fine. It had not been fine, but I nodded because she was Lily's grandmother and always would be, and that mattered more than being right. Lily loves you, I said. That does not have to change. Renata pressed her lips together and nodded and went back outside, and I heard her say something to Douglas in a low voice, and I heard the back gate open and then close. If you're still with me, stay, because what happened over the following weeks is the part that settled everything. The divorce petition moved quickly. Daniel retained an attorney, a process that took him 9 days, which Beatrice noted dryly was slower than she had expected for someone with that much to protect. The financial discrepancy was formalized. The 2 undisclosed accounts, which Daniel's attorney ultimately could not credibly explain away, were factored into the asset division. My consulting practice and the investment property were confirmed as my separate property. The matrimonial home went on the market in June of 2024 and sold in 31 days for $610,000. After the mortgage payoff and the division, I walked away with enough to make a purchase I had been thinking about for 2 years. The college fund was untouched. $65,000, still growing, still monthly, still exactly what it had always been, mine and Lily's, no one else's business. Beatrice and I had a final meeting in August of 2024 in her office on the 14th floor with the river view she still never looked at. She pushed the signed settlement agreement across the desk to me, and I reviewed it and signed it, and she put it in a folder and told me I had been a good client. Meaning what? I asked. Meaning you came in with documentation instead of emotion, she said. It makes the work cleaner. I thought about that on the drive home. Diane did not lose her job. I want to be accurate. There was no professional consequence for what she had done to me, because what she had done to me was not illegal, and the world does not always arrange consequences as neatly as we might prefer. What happened to Diane was slower, and I think, in its own way more complete. Within 3 months of the birthday party, her professional network had contracted significantly. The people we had known in graduate school, the ones who had been both of ours, the Friday group that had continued loosely for almost a decade, stopped including her. Not through any campaign I ran. I did not run a campaign. I simply stopped being her cover, which meant that the stories she had been telling for 18 months started to develop holes that other people could see. The last I heard of Diane Ackafer was from a mutual contact who mentioned, without apparent significance, that she had transferred to a different city for work. I wished her nothing. Not harm, not well. I simply stopped tracking her the way you stop tracking a flight that has already landed. Daniel moved into an apartment in September of 2024. He and Lily have dinner every Wednesday and every other weekend. Lily calls him Daddy, which she has always done and which she will continue to do, because her father's failures are his to carry and not hers to inherit. She is doing well. She started kindergarten in the fall with a teacher she loves, and she has 2 best friends whose names she mentions constantly, and she has recently developed an intense interest in the ocean that I suspect is related to the mermaid birthday cake and am not going to overthink. The investment property appraised at $580,000 in January of 2025. I have retained it. Quaim is managing its performance as part of a portfolio review we do every quarter. The consulting practice has 7 full-time employees now, and we are about to close a contract with a healthcare network that will be the largest single engagement in the firm's history. I do not work from a home office anymore. I work from the 3rd floor of a building downtown with a window that faces west, and on clear days, I can see far enough that the horizon does the thing horizons are supposed to do. My mother called me on the morning after the birthday party, before she drove back to Dayton, and she sat across from me at my kitchen table with her coffee, and she looked at me and she said simply, "You handled that right." I did not tell her I had been building toward it for over a year. She is my mother. She already knew. Lily came downstairs in her pajamas during that conversation, still wearing a paper crown from the party favor kit, and she climbed into my lap without asking and settled there like she had always been there, which she had. I put my arms around her, and she smelled like cake and sleep and her own particular 5-year-old warmth, and I held her while my mother talked about the drive back and the weather and other ordinary things, and I did not feel vindicated, and I did not feel broken. I felt, for the first time in a long time, that the ground under my feet was exactly the right ground, and that it was mine. Lily asked me last month whether Diane was coming to her next birthday. I said no. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, thinking it over the way she thinks things over. "That's okay," she said, and went back to drawing mermaids at the kitchen table. That was enough, more than enough. So, did I go too far, or not far enough? Tell me in the comments.